everyone, and thanks so much for joining. We're here with Ms. Stacy Young, Dr. Anthony Jenkins, and Mr. Perry Medina. Stacy is the Assistant Director for the Rutgers Alternate Route Teacher Training Program at the Center for Effective School Practices. Dr. Anthony Jenkins is a 20-year teaching and school leadership veteran and currently serves as principal in Plainfield School District. He is joined by his vice principal, Mr. Perry Medina. Stacy, Anthony, and Perry, take it away.
So let's start by discussing why you felt it was important to establish a focus on rigor and assessment for your session.
Well, this initially was a reaction to the lack of congruity we saw between classroom performance data, achievement results on report cards and honor roll, and state assessment results.
And I think, kind of going beyond that, and as I kind of make a connection back to my own experience as alternate route, there are a lot of things that happen with professional development or things that don't happen with professional development that I think that assessment design really kind of lends itself to fill that gap. So when we think about, as two school administrators here, when we think about what is the common theme, the common thread, we find that everything kind of comes back to assessments, and in this case, assessment design. So as we kind of do our own grade levels and have our own staff meetings, and we're constantly looking at data, we see that when there is an improperly designed assessment or the assessment is just overall weak, we're not really getting the results that we were hoping for. Not saying that we were looking for a number of students to either pass or fail, but what can we draw from the assessment data? And really that kind of goes back to how well the assessment was designed. So going back to the idea of, teaching new teachers about different aspects of education, we know that if we can get our teachers with a shared understanding of what makes a good assessment, we know that we'll be able to more accurately or better inform practice and, student learning.
If I can just add to that, it also adds a degree of validity to the results that you're looking at. For example, we can see great data, great performance data, but the validity isn't there if we don't know that the assessment itself was true to the standard and accurately measuring what it is we wanted to understand and capture.
Absolutely. Candidates indicated that there were 5 aspects of rigor and assessment discussed during the session. Can you address each of those briefly?
Sure. So the first one, which is alignment. Simply put, it's how well are the standards aligned to the question. So how well can the teacher match up the standard with what's being asked? So I think a lot of times when we look at, and I guess we'll just kind of draw from our own experiences here. When we look at certain assessments, a teacher may think that they're asking a question that addresses a certain standard, but when we start breaking it down and we look at the skills that are associated with that standard, we see that there are some gaps or discrepancies, and the teacher's not really getting what they want to get from that misalignment. The next one is rigor.
Well, with rigor, we wanted to make sure that we were actually assessing what the standard required, and another way of putting it, what is the standard asking us to do? And sometimes we were touching on the standard, we were talking around the standard, we were doing things that were connected loosely with the standard, but we weren't addressing the standard in the fullness and breadth and scope that it required to fully meet the standard. So we had to spend quite a bit of time looking at and understanding what is rigor. There was a lack of shared understanding of even the term rigor and what it meant to me, what it meant to you, what it meant to a teacher. And sometimes because we've heard a word so much, we figure, yeah, I know what rigor is. But we saw there was great difficulty in having the staff articulate a shared understanding or a clear definition of rigor. And primarily what came out of that was, well, rigor just means it's hard.
Yeah, and adding to that, so we want, I guess for this podcast, we want to make sure that we are kind of having our own shared understanding, rigor is really just cognitive challenge. So when we think about rigor, and a cool way of getting everyone on the same page is to really just look at Bloom's taxonomy and kind of associate those verbs with the level of rigor we are hoping to achieve. So once we introduced that Bloom's taxonomy, and speaking directly about that last session we did at Rutgers, I think it really started to make a connection with a lot of teachers in the room.
So you mentioned the need to align standards to the assessment. Candidates raved about an alignment handout that you shared. Can you say a little bit about that resource and why it's particularly useful for teachers?
Well, the alignment resource really just kind of showed teachers how to break down the standard, so basically unpacking the standard. And when teachers are required or expected to design a quality assessment, they have to have full control of the standard, and they'll have to be able to wield their knowledge to create questions that fully address the standard and all of its skills. So with that handout, it really kind of gives that teacher a script. So, although I may not be a big fan of a script, because I kind of like to just go right off the top of my head, I understand that a lot of people don't necessarily work that way. So in having different resources to help us get, our desired results, we know that we sometimes have to give something out that teachers can really draw from. And in this case, that alignment sheet really showed teachers how to look at standards in a way that breaks them down by skill.
I would just add that we felt it was imperative that teachers were able to identify the specific learning objectives embedded under each standard, and that we started to talk about where the breakdowns occur. If we want to meet in the standard, by breaking the standards down into specific learning objectives, we were able to see if the problem was this particular objective was causing a student to not meet the standard. So it gave us a way to really kind of drill down at performance and see where the breakdowns were occurring when children were not meeting proficiency.
And Dr. Jenkins alluded to the idea of schema, and teachers are, we didn't get here by accident. Everybody is here. They're deserving, very smart individuals, college educated, of course. So although the teacher and ourselves, we may have a really great understanding of individual standards, we sometimes that actually works against us. So we take things for granted. So I set up a question, and I think it's addressing the standard because I know it so well, but I'm not, when the students answer that question, they're not getting the answer right. But I know that I taught them it. So what is the breakdown? So this, assessment design and especially alignment really forces the teacher to kind of look back at, what did I give these students? Is it the right thing? Is it accurate? And what does it say about my teaching? So you can only really do that if you know that your assessment is pretty tight.
Wow. So I must say that candidates absolutely loved your session, and more time was a theme in your session feedback. So how can they continue learning about this topic on their own time? What would you suggest?
Well, I'm certainly appreciative of the positive feedback. I think one of the things, if I can just quickly, as an aside, I think Dr. J and I really work well together in terms of having that kind of conversational dialogue and really getting the participants to do the same thing. One of the things we were discussing before we, this was actually yesterday before we started preparing our notes, is, how would we approach this opportunity, this podcast? And I think what works well is just getting people to feel comfortable and having a conversation versus a lecture. So I think that really is why the participants enjoyed it. But in terms of kind of what can they do, what's the next step? I mean, simply put, they can just Google assessment design, and I believe the first link is going to be the link they want to click, which is csai-online.org, and they'll find all of the resources there that were handed out that day. But beyond that, I think just really during their grade levels or during their staff meetings, just continue to have conversations around what this assessment is intended to do and what kind of learning is demonstrated by these assessments.
Yeah, I can iterate what Ms. Medina said. Certainly assessment design toolkit, I would Google that. The tools we got from there really clarified what we thought in our heads, and they're able to give it to teachers in a very concrete way. There are video modules there that'll walk you through each of the 5 aspects of alignment, of assessment, and that's really was extremely helpful in really clarifying our thoughts.
Well, thank you both very much. Stacy, Anthony, Perry, all of who came to the conversation. It was such a rich conversation. I'm very grateful. And let's hope that the educators who listen to this podcast will reflect on the level of rigor in their assessments and make the necessary adjustments to improve the cognitive demand of their questions and assignments. Thanks for that word, right? Thanks again, and have a wonderful day.
My pleasure.